That's it. The little blue bar has come up to say we're live. Today is Monday, the 16th of July, 2018. We have Flat Earth Dude here. We have Patricia. A couple of more people will be joining, but very special guests, Maria Wheatley and Brien Foerster. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
Yeah, very great pleasure to have you both together. And also, you two are friends, aren't you?
Yeah. We're actually working together on the elongated skull phenomenon.
Which is amazing.
It is.
So, and also, you're coming to England and coming to Silbury Hill, aren't you, later on this year?
Yeah, in September, and then I'm going to be meeting up with Maria in Glastonbury and do some exploration in that beautiful part of the world.
Well, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm hoping to come and meet you both.
Great.
So, elongated skull talk. Where would you like to start?
Where
do you start?
Well, I guess we could discuss the latest. We finally had the DNA testing done that cost $100,000 and took 5 years to do. And the results were quite amazing, and no academics have picked up on this at all. It's just there's no academic interest in it. What we found out was that the commonality of the Paracas people from 2,000 to 3,000 years ago on the coast of Peru, that most of their DNA ancestry seems to come from the Black Sea and Crimea area.
Wow. So what does this mean then?
Well, it means a migration to the coast of Peru. Oh, how long? Well, let's see. The Spanish arrived here in 1532 AD. So we're talking 3,000. 3,000? No. Well, yeah, about 3,000 years ago, these people showed up on the coast of Peru who were not Native American in origin.
Yes. These elongated people, Maria Wheatley said when she was on last time that maybe these people had an extra chakra.
Well, that could be. There are a lot of genetic abnormalities as regards them too, and recent examination by medical professionals, they're insisting that these were not Homo sapiens sapiens, but probably a subspecies of human that were able to breed with Homo sapiens sapiens. So that, again, academics are not looking at the subject at all, which I find disturbing and comical at the same time.
Yeah, I think over here there's a kind of similar trait as well, because, there hasn't been any DNA testing on any of the skulls from the Stonehenge environs that definitely showed natural long-skulled shape. Then there seems to be no interest. But the recent DNA studies coming out of Oxford regarding the ancient Britons, rather than the Beaker culture, which migrated here in 2500 BC, shows that they were very dark-skinned and probably blue-eyed and quite short in their height. And this was an occurrence around 2500 BC, when it seems there was a very large immigration coming out of the Netherlands area that mixed into our own DNA, according to Oxford University.
Wow.
I think, though, a lot of the tests that I've done, it would be great to see at Oxford University and Cambridge to have independent studies. That's what I think would be a good step forward, so that a lot of people collaborate with uncovering the truth rather than just listening to the media statements provided.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, these this bit about them being subhuman, what does that mean then?
Well, it's some physical factors that are involved. The foramen magnum, which is where your spinal column enters the bottom of your skull, is 2.5 centimeters back in the elongated skull people. So that's a genetic characteristic. Also, the foramen magnum is not round the way it is with us. It's more oval shaped and narrower. So the theory is that they actually had longer necks than what we have. And so that's another factor. Also, genetically, they had dark red hair, which is associated with probably green or blue eyes and light colored skin. So again, those are factors that you don't find in the Native American population whose ancestors crossed the Bering Land Bridge. So we're talking about an independent migration of people, probably as the result of being invaded by someone else and being forced out of the homeland. So that's more or less where I'm at the moment in terms of this investigation.
Does that mean that what Marie Wheatley's talking about and you, they're the same people, but the ones got here first and then they carried on and they went across to you?
Well, it's a really complex story because if we look at the Black Sea and Crimea area, which again the DNA is pointing to in every example. So all Native American people, especially from Mexico down to Patagonia, their haplogroup, mitochondrial haplogroup, which is the mother's DNA, is exclusively A, B, C, or D. So that's the Inca, that's the Maya, et cetera, et cetera. But the DNA of the Paracas, there's some like minimal presence of haplogroup B, which means breeding with Native American people. But the other DNA types are U2E, U2E1, H, H1, H2, H2A, and K. And those, again, the commonality is the Black Sea, Caspian Sea area. And again, the timeline's about the same, and the same shape and size of elongated skull are found in that area, the few examples that I've been able to see photographs of. But then you have the migration of Attila the Hun into Europe from Eurasia much later, and they performed cranial deformation. And then recently I was given information that some of these elongated headed people of the Crimea and Black Sea area, the females were actually were prized by Western European nobility to become wives. So that's a new factor. So that may have caused migration farther into Europe, because skulls of elongated skull people, places like Romania and Germany and France and different parts. And Maria's discovery, of course, is the whole thing about the Long Barrows and Stonehenge area. She should actually elaborate much more on that, because that's her area, not mine.
Well, yeah, I mean, the fascinating thing within the Stonehenge area for phase one was a time when the elongated people certainly seemed to make that their capital, because when you look to other ancient sites such as Avery Hill, which Karen is very familiar with, and other sites further afield, to be only a few people placed into those long barrows. So we see Stonehenge as being the capital. Interesting with the latest DNA studies, time of Copper Age, which is strictly 2,500 BC, the transitional phase into Bronze Age, when phase two of Stonehenge was being built, and that's the Stonehenge we're all familiar with, big stones, etc. 100% of elongated people by 100-year period, going from the Copper Age into the Bronze Age, only 10% were left. Now, graves, and I looked at a lot of the long barrow months, and they,
Can I just
murdered,
say
but
something?
just population.
If sorry,
Thought that what wiped out. Sure.
sorry, Marie, I didn't mean to stop you then. It's just that you were breaking up a little bit. Sometimes if you're breaking up, it's just best to just take your camera off because it takes so much of the bandwidth. It's just you were explaining that to us and it just cut out. It's just cutting out. I don't know if anybody else could hear you.
Okay, I'll switch the video off.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Oh, you're back on.
Yep, that's should be off now.
Yeah, you're sounding okay now. Could you just explain that again? I'm really sorry.
That's okay. These things happen. That's fine. Yeah, I was just explaining that around about the time of the transitional phase at Stonehenge, which is in the Copper Age, Chalcolithic period, which is 2500 BC, leading into the Copper Age, then there was, according to the DNA evidence, around a good deal of people with long skulls. After that date, there seems to be only 10% of the population of the long-skulled people left within the Stonehenge environs, and probably the southwest of England, we can conclude. But as I discovered in most of the long barrows around the area, the long-skulled people seem to have met their demise through murder, normally by a right-handed attacker, which is clearly displayed in their skull damage. That doesn't account for the whole of the population. So the whole of the population is now thought that possibly round about that transitional phase during the Copper Age leading into the Bronze Age, if we use orthodox dating, then there must have been something else going on. And it's thought that maybe a plague or a disease wiped out the ancient Britons, and the beaker culture, as it's called, the Europeans with their round skulls, then kind of dominated the land and added to the ancient sites, which were founded by the long-skulled people. The center of Stonehenge was founded by the long-skulled culture, not the round-skulled culture. They added to it later, at a later date, 500 years later.
Yes, and it's very exciting to know this, that the history is different.
Well, that's the thing, it's with researchers like ourselves to try to uncover the hidden truths.
Mm-hmm.
Have they done as much, like with what Brian's talking about and the fact he's made many, many videos on it? Have they done this much testing on your skulls, or are they a bit behind with testing?
No, they say that on the one skull that is clearly very long skulled, which I call the Neolithic Queen of Stonehenge, although she could have been a priestess or indeed both, that her skull is contaminated because unfortunately when she was dug out in the Victorian period from the Long Barrow, there was a lot of damage done in transit from the Salisbury Plain to then Devizes, actually. That's the first port of call that she went to. So then she was glued back together. So the glue, they say, contaminated the DNA. But I did notice underneath, when I looked underneath her skull, that the teeth were still in place. So I think you could get some DNA from the skull. I don't think it's all contaminated, but they don't seem to be interested. And if indeed that is to occur, then it will take private funding.
Mm-hmm.
Is that because they don't want to move history on or around? Because that changes history, doesn't it? If the DNA proves something different.
It could be a multitude of things. It could be, they could be that. And on top of that, it's all about funding at universities these days, money. Maybe the hidden history aspect. I think there's a layer of activity going on within university campuses.
Was it the same for the ones that you found? Because I think Maria said when she was on last time that a lot of these long elongated skulls were female. Is that right?
Well, males as well at Stonehenge.
Right.
Well,
Do you think
actually,
they're the same people? Oh, carry on. Sorry, carry on, Brian.
Yeah,
you carry on.
I think the idea that the whole skull is contaminated is a cheap excuse to try to stop any testing being done, because what you have to do, the best DNA comes from molar teeth, or also from the marrow. So there's marrow around the what's it called, the foramen magnum area of the skull, and also into the sinuses. So that could be taken and tested. It just requires quite hygienic conditions, but just because the surface of the skull has been fondled, or even if it's been broken and glued back together, you can access DNA from the virgin areas of the skull that have not been, where the surface is not exposed. So I've heard that kind of story over and over again, and it's in many cases it's a cheap excuse to stop the trail of inquiry from continuing.
Yeah, exactly. The teeth were intact. I got a good photograph of the underneath of the skull as well. So yes, I agree fully with that.
Yeah, and actually, DNA testing now, it's not that expensive. The laboratory that we used, which is at Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, Ontario, Canada, will test a sample, even if it's 2,000 or 3,000 years old, or maybe even older. It's I think $700 a sample. So it's come down by about 95% in the last 6 years.
Well, that's doable.
Yeah.
I mean, I would really like to see advance through the DNA studies with some of these skulls as well.
Sorry, Maria, you're just dipping out again.
Yeah, so I'd like to see a lot more of the DNA testing done within the megalithic sites of the British Isles. Not just including Stonehenge, but other sites besides, because there's some very unusual burials that have been recorded in times past. That I think, if they can be tracked down, the remains, and I've tracked down quite a few of the remains, and I think we will be absolutely astonished at some of the finds. One of the graves that were just discovered about 250 years ago now at Stonehenge described a being with a tail, some kind of tail that actually really shocked the antiquarian diggers in their tracks at that time. And also, it's a very strange burial, because the kind of more humanoid looking people were putting their arms around this very unusual looking human being. So I think that would prove very exciting to do a DNA test on that.
When Brian comes over to the UK, he won't be able to go back because there's just so much to do here.
No, there is. Especially going to the pub.
Yes, that's what we do here, isn't it? Go to the pub.
Yeah, I'm right behind you, Brian.
Great.
Oh,
well,
we just
also, what I found is that the best way to approach this is to, whenever possible, is to take samples from private collections and independently do the DNA testing. Because if you have to go through an institution like Oxford or Cambridge or something, then you have to deal with all of the bureaucracy, and that's when you encounter those that don't want this kind of study done. So if it's done independently, then you're much more, it's much more probable that you'll get a viable study in a relatively short period of time done.
Yes, that needs to be moved forward. I will certainly ask for independent tests of that. That's a brilliant way forward.
I have to say though, Maria, for us, because obviously Brian's where he is and he's looking at what he does, but you're somewhere where I know, and I'm just amazed that there's such a lack of history of what's really gone on, and the fact that these elongated people were there first, and they built different barrows, the whole thing, and that the rest of it was added on. You're
Yes, I know.
person.
Yeah, it is. And it's even more interesting when we look at megalithic stone circles, because, again, a lot of people and tourists alike, when they come over to visit the British Isles and its many wonders, its rain, certain as it is today, they look at somewhere like a Cumbrian stone circle. I've just come back from a tour in the Cumbrian stone circles. They're actually older than Stonehenge, and they're older than Avebury-Henge. And they're built in phases. So when we look at the first phase of a stone circle, we will always find a very unusual setting and an older part to it. And that was the elongated people making the first megalithic statement in the British Isles by finding particular earth energies, I would suggest, and other things besides, to place those stone upon. So when we look at Long Meg and her daughters in Cumbria, a very ancient stone circle, Long Meg, which is the outline lying stone of red sandstone, very different to the different types of slate that the stone circle is made up of, we know that they have two different phases. So a lot of people come to Avebury and Stonehenge and think it was all built at exactly the same time. And that's where I think their forgotten history should unfold about who did which phase of the monuments. And even at Long Meg, we could safely say that that first standing stone to be erected on the most powerful energy spot was the Long Skull people, is their legacy.
I'm sure that's what Brien says as well now, isn't it, Brien?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, people tend to look like, as Maria said, they tend to look in quite a shallow way at something and go, oh, this was built between this and this, and they don't look at the pre-construction. Quite often, different groups or society are involved over a much longer period of time. That's also the case, for example, for the Nazca lines in Peru. It wasn't simply native people called the Nazca who did that. It was actually two different cultures. The Paracas elongated skull culture began the whole process from 500 BC until about 100 AD, and they completed 1,600 geoglyphs. And then the Nazca people joined in later from 100 AD to 500 or 600 AD, and they created the large ones that most people are familiar with. But the whole system is something like 240 kilometers long, which most people don't realize, and took place over 1,000 years.
Amazing. Just really amazing. Because it's bad enough in a sense that they've lied to what the pyramids were about. It's all done in stages. And all those methalithic structures, they've got different kind of stones, haven't they? Big ones, smaller ones. So these are different people.
Well, this is the thing. This is what Brian's explaining. I mean, you do have different phases. Phase one of a particular monument, phase two, phase three. But here is the thing. I mean, I'm sure Brien will echo this in his own studies. When we look at Avebury-Henge, which is just down the road for Karen and I, containing the world's largest stone circle, and certainly the heaviest megalith in England, which is part of what's called the Cove Stones, which is well over 100 tons. But that was the first phase of Avebury. The heaviest stones, the most complex features were, again, the elongated long skull people, because they are the very early Neolithic peoples that started these monuments off in a way. They were the first creators. They gave birth to the megalithic culture here in the UK.
No, that's a good point, and it's also echoed in places like Egypt and here in Peru and also Bolivia. The most complex work was always done first, and then it goes downhill afterwards. And lately, I've been watching some relatively recent discoveries in Egypt done by conventional academics, and the stories are, the stories just become so corny because they're trying desperately still to cram everything into what we call the dynastic phases of Egypt, and some of these things just don't fit in. Some of this stuff had to have been done with lost ancient high technology, or in the case of Avebury, moving 100-ton stone is not an easy feat when you have a landscape where it rains a lot. So how are you supposed to move these things, in areas that are quite often soggy ground for most of the year?
Do you think our temperature might have been a bit different then?
I think the temperature at the very early Neolithic was warmer, but I mean that still doesn't say that from where the actual stones came from for both Avebury and Stonehenge was quite some distance away. It's in a place called the Valley of the Stones, which is the motherland of Avebury and Stonehenge. But it's not just about moving the stone, it's getting the stone out of the ground, because thousands and thousands of years ago, there was a glacial deposit of the sarsen stone of Avebury and Stonehenge. You had to get them out of the ground. And that is a feat in itself, let alone moving it through the largest hill ranges to get it to Avebury and Stonehenge. But it's like what Brian's saying, the oldest parts of any culture, I feel, at the moment, the complex movement of stone, etc., is all about trying to rewrite history so that we understand it. And I think that's where people like us come in, because these heavy stones were moved by the earliest people and on the complex points in terms of very, very deep underground water, also associated with environments like Avebury and Stonehenge, a large amounts of gamma radiation that I've recorded using a Geiger counter. I think, they were using all of these natural resources to create a high technology. And certainly the Geiger counter readings do flare up at certain times, but only within the stone circle and not on the outside is truly remarkable and inexplicable.
Wow. I don't want to sort of make a mistake here, but is it sort of more under the assumption that the pyramid stones may have been made, like poured and made on site? Do you think any of these stones, the same thing? It's just that they're damaged now. Hello? Can you hear me?
That would be a Maria question, I believe.
Well, yeah, to Maria, sorry. Yeah, it would help if I said the person, Maria.
Yeah, I didn't hear the question, actually. You broke up for me, so I didn't hear, sorry.
I was just saying, like, it's coming maybe that people are believing that the pyramids, a lot of these stones were made on site, that they were poured. Do you think any of these stones were actually poured? It's just that they're damaged now because we've had floods, whatever. They've tried to...
yeah, okay. Well, no, because of the Valley of the Stones is where the outcrop came from. Clearly, with a very good discerning eye, if you can walk around the Valley of the Stones, you can actually see where they were taken from Stonehenge, the actual shapes. And then in 1722, William Stukely, the Reverend William Stukely, who revived Buddhism in this country, he drew these fascinating pictures of these stones, which never actually made it to Stonehenge, but were kind of deposited not far from where I live, in Marlborough, for example, which was just unearthed at the Bodleian Library in Oxford just a few years ago. So I think that they are a natural form of sandstone, but it's like my late father pointed out, when you work with sandstone, it's a fantastic medium, because there isn't really that much difference between the lattice crystal structure of a sandstone, like Avebury and Stonehenge, to a microchip from Silicon Valley. They're both very, very similar in their internal lattice structure. So he coined the phrase, these large stones at Stonehenge are microchips, and you've got tiny microchips from Silicon Valley. So this is a kind of long lost technology of using silicon in prehistory, is what I suggest. But I do feel that they came from the Valley of the Stones, and they were a natural source that was then worked into shape in particular areas of megalithic complexes like Avebury and Stonehenge.
Yeah,
well,
I do. Oh,
well,
sorry.
No, that's a very good point. And of course, people, are still talking about geopolymers as being how for example, the Great Pyramid was made. But the problem with that is that you would have to take the limestone, for example, and you'd have to grind it up into the consistency of flour in order to create a concrete of some kind. So that would mean you would need to be able to make forms to pour this limestone concrete into. And the trouble is, what would they have made the forms out of? They didn't have plywood in those days. And also every single stone in the Great Pyramid, of which there are between 2.3 and 2.5 million, are a different shape and size. So that means 2.3 million to 2.5 million different forms. So geologists have confirmed that the limestone of the Great Pyramid is from the Giza Plateau, because they've done studies, and also that the granite probably that's inside came from the Aswan quarry in southern Egypt. But it could be that the mortar that was used to cement the inner stones together, it was some kind of geopolymer mortar that was produced, and tests on that have shown that it's harder than any concrete that can presently be made. So that's another example of lost ancient high technology. And also Maria's thoughts about the composition of the stone is very important, because what we find in Peru and Bolivia is that all of the megalithic construction was done in general using stone that's very high in quartz. And that, when you get into that, it's very specific, from very specific quarries. And so that's where you get into the whole concept of the sites being highly energetic in nature when they were constructed. And that was part of the function of them. And of course, if you're sensitive at all, then when you go to a place like Avebury or you go to Stonehenge, you do automatically go into an alternate state of consciousness, because that's, the vibration of the stone is still present. And of course, you find that in the structures as well in the highlands of Peru. That's what draws me back over and over again. It's not simply an intellectual study of what these things were, how they were made, but it's wanting to be in that area because of the incredible mild but vibrational energy that is emitted and does relate almost directly with the sacred geometry of our bodies.
Wow.
That's so true, because I mean, I was at the most complete stone circle probably in the British Isles just yesterday. Actually, it's called Swinside, and unlike Avebury and Stonehenge and various other megalithic monuments in the British Isles, it hasn't been reconstructed in any way, so it's natural. And out of the 64 standing stones, 54 still remain, and you have about 30 or so still standing. And there's this very beautiful entrance that faces the midwinter sunrise. And the two stones, kind of the portal stones, the entrance stones to it, just give off an amazing amount of heat. And everybody in the group that I took there experienced that heat. And it's like Brien says, once you go from the outside, from the profane to the sacred inner realm, you are in an altered state of consciousness. And this is where change can happen. And what I see about taking people to stone circles is that, especially in a group consciousness where everybody gets to know each other and feels more relaxed, you can have a switch on and a change of consciousness that the group experiences. And this is why I think places are being cordoned off, like Stonehenge. You can't have too many people, becoming too aware at any one time. So that's one reason I feel why you only get private access.
Hello? No, we haven't just lost Maria, have we?
No, I was speaking then. Didn't you hear me, Karen?
No, the very last bit. We just didn't hear about the last minute.
Gosh. Yeah, I was saying about, the altered states of consciousness that a stone circle in its purity, like Swinside, that hasn't been re-erected and set in concrete, because when you look at somewhere like Stonehenge, the greater trilithon wasn't even put in the correct position when Goland re-erected it in the 1920s. It's exactly 30 centimeters out. Can you hear me, Karen?
Yeah, we're okay. Sorry, somebody just joined.
Yeah, so my point is, when we come to the kind of more natural stone circles and megalithic complexes, it's very rich and pure in energy, and you can feel the heat coming off the stones, and there's a sense of pure wonder.
I think it was you on this video where someone's got the dowsing rods on them, and that the stones have got different energies in them anyway, in the stone circle at Avebury.
Yes, that's right. They have energy bands that I did a lot of work with an independent team, that with Rodney Hale, that often works with Andy Collins and helped him with the Cygnus mystery. Yeah, and I went with Rodney Hale there, and we did prove that at the particular points in the stone, of which I doused first, to say that these were the high energy points where you get particular frequencies coming out is undeniable. Rodney proved that with his equipment. We're just beginning to remember and re-understand stone circles, and it's in its infancy. You could have all of the books on megaliths and you could read them as a library, but we still don't really understand the nature of this ancient long lost culture.
It's amazing. What do you both want to happen now with these elongated skulls, by the way? Both of you, like, where is the journey you'd like to go with these skulls?
Well, for me, it's simply to expose the information more and more to a wider audience. Again, we actually had a press conference in Los Angeles. I think it was February the 3rd, and the media was supposed to show up, but most of them didn't. And then the DNA results were sent to the Ministry of Culture of Peru, because they're the ones that allowed the testing to be done. But the head archaeologist simply wrote his little report about the evidence, and then he sent it to the Ministry of Culture, and it was probably put in a box and then labeled and put away for no one else to see. So that the problem with dealing with academia is that very often they don't want new discoveries to be made, which is counter to what most people think. But they're trying to keep their paradigm in a tight and narrow band of knowledge, and so that's why I decided to use YouTube, and so I made a series of 7 videos about the results, and they've been viewed over 1 million times by people around the world. So I think it's giving the information directly to the public is the future for any of these pursuits, and that way you expose it to people, and then you'll tend to have at least a few who have information that they want to add to them into the matrix. And so that's why I'm very much looking forward to coming to England, not only for this UFO conference that I'm going to in Yorkshire, but also to be able to go to Stonehenge once again with an expert like Maria, a local expert, and be able to experience in a very different way. The last time that I was there, we weren't allowed inside, but there was a lady who was standing with a cane that had I think a goat's head on it or something, and she had this very amazing red hair, and she was obviously in a state of meditation or contemplation. And so I walked up to her and I said, "Are you the caretaker of this place?" And she said, "In a way." And she said, "Would you like to hold my staff?" And I said, "Oh, okay." So I did, and within 10 seconds, I broke down crying. That's the power of these places if you have open sensitivity. And my lament was that I had been spending most of my life studying indigenous cultures and had not really taken into account my own. So that was like a wake-up call to me that the earth of the area itself, and to some degree my ancestors, wanted to communicate the knowledge of the area with me. And so that's why I'm very excited to go back to, I think, a far more profound experience this time than the previous 3 times that I'd been to Stonehenge.
What about for you, Maria?
For me, I really do feel that these were people who lived lives, had children, loved and moaned and hated, and had good times and bad times. And I feel that, you know, their story has never been told. And I can remember using dowsing. I said this to you before, Karen, when my dowsing led me to the largest long barrow in Northwest Europe, and I led on top of it. And I just said, I'm going to find out who you are. I will tell your story, and I will try to understand. So for me, it's a journey to allow us to understand the past, to honor the past, to reconnect to the past, then to re-educate people from a young age. And, you know, Brien's work on YouTube, but to reconnect children to the correct history. And I take out sort of about 4 times a year freely for the love of it, school kids that interact with earth energies and to learn, you know, the secret history of places like Stonehenge. So for me, it's about understanding the past and getting the younger people to see a totally different world.
Oh, Mass coming with you? Or are you both like getting resistance? Because it changes things, doesn't it? Maria?
Yeah, I've got some resistance from different universities that, you know, it becomes quite problematic to get viewings and things like that. But then when I kind of entered the system by studying the transitional phase of bronze into iron at Oxford University, it allowed me more sort of like access and freedom. So I think if you're part of the system, it helps a little bit more. So I ended up doing a kind of academic paper on the cosmology of daily living, actually, for the Iron Age. I mean, it's not exactly thrilling for the average public, but it does allow you access, and I've got some gems by being in the system rather than fighting against it.
Wow. What about you, Brien?
What's that?
Do you see any resistance for what you're trying to do?
It's more being ignored than anything else. I mean, Graham Hancock had a hell of a time when he wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, where he was attacked by academics for, I think, a decade. And I think because the amount of information that we're uncovering is becoming so extensive now, that some of the academics would prefer to simply ignore rather than engage in debate or battling or whatever. So again, my whole key is to share the information with the world in general. I don't really deal with academics that much anymore because of the latest example with the archaeologist having the DNA results and not honestly understanding what they were, because it's an earth-shattering discovery. But he just said, well, those results are very strange, and I'll write my report about it. But he didn't say, for example, well, why are these haplogroups different from Native American ones? So that's where you have a situation where somebody has put themselves in a box and are not open to new information. And I applaud what Maria's doing, because my wife here, who is Peruvian, is doing the same thing with local children, is taking them to ancient places almost in the neighborhood that they weren't aware of, and just exposing the ancient knowledge to them so that they can be proud of where they live and the complex ancestry of the area. And more, I'm becoming engaged with Peruvians who want to hear what I have to say. There used to be some resistance because I'm a foreigner, but now they see that my body of knowledge is actually quite big, and it's been good for me being an outsider, because I come into the situation with an inquiring I guess you'd almost say, European-based scientific mind. Yeah, I have no doubts whatsoever that the information is increasing, that we're learning, and we're able to share it through the internet, which is a phenomenal tool for this. And so I'm not waiting for scholars to engage. If they want to, that's fine. But if they don't, then I have, there's a 7 billion human audience out there that some of which, or of whom, are very hungry to learn. And these sites are so complex, right? Now we're getting into not simply the stone composition or how were these stones moved, but we're getting into the energetics, which is far more fascinating and esoteric and really interesting. So again, that's why I'm looking forward to being back in England to see these sites with hopefully new eyes to look and new senses to feel the places.
Yeah, because it's changed since you were last here, hasn't it, Brien?
And also, I have to agree with Maria. Whenever a place becomes popular or is enigmatic, they automatically throw a fence around it, and restrictions become strict, tighter and tighter and tighter. It's the same thing in Peru. Every time I visit some of the places like Sacsayhuaman, which is this monstrous site with stones as big as 120 tons, they rope off a little more, and it's always the enigmatic aspect that they're trying to restrict. It's not because they're trying to protect the place from damage, it's that they don't want you to probe deeper into it. So Egypt actually is going the opposite direction, which is quite fascinating. There's a location called the Osiris Shaft, which is on the Giza Plateau, and it's been off limits to anyone but the highest level of academia for probably hundreds of years. But in November of 2017, they decided to open it up to the public. And so we were able to go in March, and it's a shaft that goes down 200 feet into the bedrock. And I was able to film it in high definition for 2 hours. So I was able to get the information out. And I'm hoping when I go back in April of next year that they will have opened up even more of the previously prohibited locations, because they're the places with evidence of lost ancient high technology. And so Egypt's looking better and better as time goes on.
That's really good. Can I just say that Robert's joined us? Robert lives in Mexico, and he's got lots of questions just down the road from him. Hello, Robert. Oh, is he frozen?
A second. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, Robert. We can hear you. What is going on today? Well, anyway, he's gone a bit quiet right now. Maybe he's muted himself. But Maria, you said these stone circles have heat and things on them. So do you think inside these stone circles there is a frequency going on, a bit like the corn circles? Those kind of frequencies.
Well, I think, it's like anything. It's like a diamond. So you have to look at one aspect, which could be, for example, placement. Placement was very important to our ancient elongated skulled ancestors. So the art of placement was very important. So when we start to look at the central features of inner stone circles such as Avebury and Stonehenge, for example, they're the oldest part of the monument. They tend to be placed on very, very, very deep water. I mean, not groundwater, not aquifers. I'm not talking about aquifers. I'm going down deep, 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 which is how esoteric water diviners has always seen it. So I see this like acupuncture points on particular types of water. Sometimes it can be aquifer water, sometimes it can be deeper water, and then feeding this into a very large ley network. And when we start looking at the ley network, we can see very clearly, for instance, that the oldest monuments obviously began the network. And if you look to a traditional ley in the UK, Europe, and beyond, and you can start to see that it was laid out by the Neolithic long-skulled people who also integrated particular energies. And that's where I'm kind of looking in my own research, is what type of energies different cultures at different points in the megalithic history were applying to their monuments.
So interesting. Yeah, Robert, could you just mute yourself when you're not talking, darling? Because it just brings a feedback. It's probably best
you
to
can't
turn
hear me?
Yeah, you better turn your camera off for bandwidth. Just turn your camera off.
On this. All right, wait a second. Wait a second.
While he's doing that, I just wanted to ask then for Brien, you said they got longer necks. Does that mean they had more discs in their neck, or they just had longer necks?
We don't know yet, because it's difficult to get hold of a mummy or a skeleton to study. They have more than 400 of them, complete mummy bundles of the royal Paracas people in the warehouse at the museum in Lima, which I've been so far denied access, but I do know the director, so I'm working on it. But that's the next aspect of them, is looking at skeletal anomalies as well. The foramen magnum is one aspect which is quite profound, and that's what differentiates the cranial deformation examples from what we believe are the original ones that were born with elongated skulls. Then you had a process of breeding of normal people with the elongated skulls, and that was, that of course resulted in the beginning of cranial deformation to maintain the look of these people of nobility, because it was only the nobility in Peru and Bolivia that had the elongated skulls. That seems obviously to be the case in England as well, as Maria stated. So that's why it'll be interesting to share notes with each other in September as regards that, because globally that's what you see, is the elongated skulls were the nobility class, and now we're looking at genetic differences.
That's certainly the case in the UK as well, Brien, because not everybody in society went into a long barrow, or even indeed a round barrow. You had what's called a lot of flat graves around the area, which is where probably I would end up, just like 6 foot under. So it is really interesting, the whole journey, to understand, the nobility of these people. And I feel the kind of priest and priestess aspect of these people as well, because I think, they did have a spirituality. They were very connected to the earth and the earth energies and the ley system. That is clear and evident. So I think that their spirituality is about to kind of unfold. And I think that some of us remember when we go back to these ancient sites, we have a kind of deja vu moment sometimes, a remembering of how things were. And I really do feel it was their seeded spirituality that eventually other cultures developed.
Sorry, what was that very last?
I think it was they seeded a spirituality with the earth, a connection with the earth through their art of placement, of where they put the standing stones, that seeded future cultures and spirituality and religions.
Wow. So I'm not sure, Robert, do you want to say something? Robert?
Are you able to hear me by any chance?
Yeah, we can hear you.
All right, good. Yeah, sorry about being sorry about being late. We've been having internet problems down here since last night, so yeah, we're probably running slow.
It's probably best to take your camera off then, because it takes bandwidth.
All right, let me.
Yeah, and when not talking, it's best to mute, because it just as a bit of feedback comes through. Yeah, there he is. Yeah, so both of you are really excited then.
Definitely, I think the future, exchanging of information, understanding our past, will allow us to understand who we were. Well, when you have a secret history and a hidden history, and it begins to unfold and flower and blossom through different authors and different ideas and perception, it allows us to understand who we are. And that is a wonder in itself, isn't it?
It is, as it's unfolding all the time, that our history is not what we think it is. I think a lot of people think it stops at the pyramids. Oh, right, we found the history now, but there's masses more, and it's under our feet, isn't it?
Definitely.
But you're saying we don't even quite understand what these stone circles are yet.
I don't think any one author has the answer and the only model. I think it's a combination of different things. I think stone circles and a lot of megalithic temples are multifaceted, different ages, different meanings, different aspects, different energies being integrated into them over time by later cultures as well. I mean, just think of the lay network anyway. You have it beginning with the elongated skull people, you have different Bronze Age cultures adding on to that system, and the Christian churches and the Templar churches, etc., which is all kind of contributing to a cultural identity that links into the seeded Neolithic period. It's linking back with all the lays. They have memories in themselves, and especially underground water, the deep underground water, not the groundwater aquifers at ancient sites. They hold on to memory like the Akashic records. Every single homeopath around the world will tell you water has memory. So sometimes when we go to this place, we can link into this kind of sacred yin water, as I often call it, to understand the past. And it is surprising what people pick up on. It really is.
Yeah, amazing. I feel like I can't really answer too much because we've got two like experts on here, and I'm not. So it's yeah, you're saying amazing stuff, which I'm sure people like to hear in the chat room, because we all know that we've been lied to and that there's much more to this. Do you think we were much more what's the word? We were much more advanced then than we are now?
Well, I think in terms of civil society, definitely. I mean, the Paracas culture, again, that's where I'm actually am, and this is extreme desert, and yet these people were able to develop the most sophisticated textiles in all of the Americas in the middle of nowhere. They developed something like 200 different shades of color from local minerals and plants and algae and things like that. They had a very they weren't technologically advanced, but they seemed to be a very spiritual society, with the leaders being the people with elongated heads, and then the local hunter-gatherers being enveloped into the society over time. They became the fishermen and agricultural experts, and the Paracas were able to find underground water systems because this area gets maybe a quarter to half an inch of rain a year, and yet the food that we eat today is grown in fields that date back at least 2,000 years. So they've been maintained. And so I think they were a very spiritual people. And unfortunately, I think like what Maria was saying about in the area of Stonehenge, these Paracas people were likely wiped out by the Nazca culture that invaded around 100 AD, because in the archaeological record, the red hair of the Paracas disappears at that time. The elongated skulls disappear at that time. And the Nazca people took over the land, but they weren't as good farmers as the Paracas. And so they wound up being wiped out as a culture by defoliating their territory by about 600 AD. So also, we have the same thing in Peru, I believe, that occurs in England, like the Michael and Mary lines, where you find sacred sites located either exactly on the lines or very close to the lines. We have the same phenomenon here called the Path of Viracocha, and it goes from the northwest to the southeast, and along that line, you find all of the megalithic sites like Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, Machu Picchu, Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, etc. So again, what we're getting into is the more esoteric aspects, one might say, or energetic aspects, and that's these things were built on a grid of some kind, and the energy of the Earth itself enhanced, or the megalithic sites were focal or energy collecting points for the energy that the Earth naturally produces. That again is why when we go to the sites in the highlands of Peru, you do go into an alternate state of consciousness quite rapidly, because the energy is not as strong as it once was, but it's still there. And if you have even a slightly energetic nature about you, or a sensitivity, then you automatically pick up on the energy. And in some ways as well, when you're able to get into that state of consciousness, then that's where the site itself is starting to educate you, because again, the limited way that academia has looked at things, they don't take into the energetic aspects of these places. And so the sites themselves seem to be the teachers just through observation. And it's my feeling that these places want to return to the level of energy and knowledge that they had in the beginning. And that's what I'm striving to do through my studies.
Hey, and thank you very much for that. And I think Maria Wheatley will say the same about, she feels that they're spiritual people, don't you, Maria?
Well, yeah, I think it was about a combination of elements. So I look at an ancient site through the earth energies of the earth currents that entwine the ley lines, and through the different types of underground water, of which I think there's about 3 different types. I think all of these elementals that were integrated into the sites by our ancient ancestors do allow us particular access. I also got shown something by a Chinese geoman, and that was how to raise the energies of an ancient site, although I myself have never done that. But I was at Stonehenge when he roused the dragon, as it's called, and he said, "I'm going to clear Stonehenge for us." And he did a particular tapping out on a particular small grid system that he created on the ground. And no joking, honestly, hand on heart, everybody just started to leave the monument, because he says if you can raise the energy, you arouse the dragon. It's not something to be, done lightly. Then it does impart energy and knowledge, like Brien says. So I'm in full agreement and can't wait to meet up in September. But it's time now for me to dip out as a mum, as well as a researcher. I've got to go and meet my daughter, Raven. And so I'm going to have to say I love you all and leave you all, and I respect your work, Brien. And
Thank
I'm
you.
absolutely thrilled that I will be meeting you in September, and carry on your good work, both Brien as well, Karen, by reaching out to people on shows like this.
No, thank you very much for joining us. It's so interesting. It's gone too
Thank you so much.
Brien, would you just stay on a bit longer? But we better say goodbye to Maria. Maria, thank you so much.
Yeah, I can stay on for say 15 minutes or so.
Yeah, I think really you need, like, Robert. Robert, it's your turn now. You can speak.
Okay. Wait a second. Wait.
This is your chance. This man lives near a lot of pyramids, so I think you might like some of his information, or like to hear it. Go for it, Robert. You've muted yourself. No, you're muted, Robert. That's it.
How about now?
Yes,
Okay.
go.
Okay, you can hear me.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, you can hear me though, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I kind of got on here kind of late. Just issues. But anyway, like when I went to Monte Alban in the state of Oaxaca, I was kind of really surprised when I went there because in their museum they had deformed they found deformed skeletal remains on the grounds, but the irony in this was is they were like sort of like giants. Like the one skull that I posted in the past was huge, and and but the people at Mount Alban were like pygmies. They were short, small people. They weren't big. So it was just really kind of neat to see that because I was already kind of looking into the fallen angels and the Nephilim and all that prior to going down there, and it was absolutely just breathtaking to go there. But this structure itself, it's hard to believe that little pygmy people built that complex. But the Codex Borgia also spoke about the giants being here in Mexico themselves, and actually in a couple different locations. But as far as the elongated skulls, no, not like I haven't seen nothing like that whatsoever. But as far as like deformed skulls, yes, they have Monte Alban. I'm sure if you look it up or you Google it, it'd probably be pictures of it. But yeah, I mean, as far as the elongated being in Peru and down South America, that's for real and everything. Here in Mexico, not so much, but there is some strange anonymous. There is definitely some strange remains here in this country as well. So, and they're usually located at these sacred sites. Like I said, I've kind of missed a good bit. I thought it would have been like at 3, and I guess these guys started at 2, but my time. But yeah, I said I'm a little bit behind the 8 ball right now because I'm not sure what you have already covered or whatnot. But yes, I mean that topic itself is very, very taboo. I mean, from what I hear, like any talk of like like any remains of usually of giants and whatnot's usually been pretty much consumed by the Smithsonian to be hidden. Um, but yeah, they do got the one skull down there in Monte Alban, and that thing is like, yeah, just abnormally larger than not. I'm not talking like a giant 30-foot giant or nothing, but I'm talking it's definitely not the size of one of ours. So I thought that was really neat considering that the people there were small. So that's about all I really got because I'm not sure what you have already covered. So I'll just sit back and kind of take in and listen for now and try to maybe get up to speed on things. Probably be the best.
Thank you, Robert. What does that mean to you, hearing what he says about Mexico, Brien?
Oh, there are a lot of elongated skulls that have been found in Mexico, especially around the Gulf Coast. There's an island called the Island of Idols where they found some reasonably large elongated skulls. The Maya performed cranial deformation. Actually, I've been to I was in Monte Alban in January, which is it's a relatively big site, but not that complex in terms of how it was made. There's another place called Wheatley, which is pretty close by, and it's amazing. It has these beams made of basalt that weighs 6 tons, 10 tons, and 18 tons. So that's another example of site transformation where there was an original megalithic construction, and then later people moved in and utilized the big stones as cross beams. So I'm going back to Mexico in February on a tour that focuses on megalithic locations. Palenque has megalithic aspects to it. Teotihuacan has some aspects to it which clearly don't fit in with the rest of the construction, especially the Temple of Quetzalcoatl. The stuff in Mexico is much more subtle than in Peru.
That's the very first temple you'll see as soon as you enter the place. Yes, yes, it's at the. I can't tell you which end, but as soon as you enter the place, it's right there. You know, it's right there. Yeah, it's that site is amazing. Now, like where I live is we have a pyramid. Well, two pyramids where I live, in Tehuacan, and they're like pretty much it's new to the public. They just kind of opened, and those temples are dedicated to the Lord of the underworld, which is hard for me to pronounce. It's Mitch I can't pronounce it. It's like real long, you know, but um, it's dedicated to the Lord of the underworld, and one side has basically where they impaled like humans through the skulls and like basically hung the humans up on one side of the pyramid. So it's kind of neat. Um, yeah, it's not a bad place to go visit,
Maybe
but there's
it's
not nothing megalithic.
them killing the elongated head people.
I could you repeat that? I didn't quite catch that.
Maybe, you know, we've just taken it that they were killing us, but maybe this is where the round-headed people were killing the elongated head people.
Well, the Codex Borgia actually says that the Aztecs were doing that. They were killing the giants, and they actually have a picture of where they drew whatnot, and they show like where they basically was pulling a giant, like it was like I can't tell you how many, but they showed them all. Like it showed them a rope around its neck and pulling it, and basically, yeah. I mean, there's definitely some history of giants being in Mexico. Plus, there's a site in oh god, I can't remember the name of the place. I was just talking about with a friend yesterday too. Tula, and there's a pyramid there, and I guess there's these at the top of the pyramid. There's these like giant figures at the top. It kind of looks like a chessboard at the top of the pyramid with these giant like look like chess pieces at the top. Um, that's another site
Have you
I
heard of
want to
that,
go
Have you heard
to.
of those?
El Toran is another.
So I was just saying, have you heard of those, Brian? Then
Oh yeah, I've been there I've been to Tula a few times. And I got
My friend was just telling me about it last night.
No, it's a great place to visit. It's only about 2 hours outside of Mexico City.
Oh, go on.
sorry.
That's what he was telling. We were just talking about it last night. Me and my yeah, he said what he was telling me, and he's adapted as well. And then I've been to like a few pyramids down here that were on private property. They're not anymore. The government took it. But when I first came down here, I had access to this one place where it was so neat because like it wasn't too, I mean it was pretty much open to the public because of this guy. He let tours in there, but the government came along and sent the university in, and they took like 11 masks or seven, I think it was 7 or 11 masks out of one pyramid, and which was valued at like over $300,000 a piece. And they never gave it back to the guy. Basically, they kept everything, and like then the government was trying to get this guy to sell his property and this and that. At the time, whenever I went to go see him, and And then I went back like this year, and now the government actually owns it. And it's horrible because like when I was there before, when the guy owned it, it was like there was like 7 pyramids on his property, and it was like they were all most of them was covered. I'm not gonna like, but you could tell they were there. And but he had like there was like 2 that was uncovered, and it was it was really cool to get walk around that complex. Now when you go there, you're restricted to like one area, and it was like wow. I mean, I remember walking up and down these other pyramids, you know, and so I mean, there's a lot of hidden stuff down here. Like there's another one close to here that's out on top of a mountain, and I didn't even realize it was there until we went on this tour at these ancient salt mines. Pocaloca people down here had salt mines, and so anyway, the point was is I was on this tour and this guy was like, "You look up there," and I looked up there and he goes, "You know, it takes all day to get up there, but there's a pyramid up there." And so I grabbed my P900 out and zoomed in on it, and I was like, "Yeah, you're right. There is there is a structure up there." And he's like, "Yeah, but it you know you got to get here early in the morning, and you know, and it take you all day to get up there." So I'm gonna try to go back to that one because he said he showed me some artifacts that he found up there, which I found many of our like when you go to most of these sites, if you just look down, like at Teotihuacan, you can actually find stuff still laying on the ground, but you kind of gotta go you kind of gotta go off the path. And if you go off the path, you'd be surprised the things you can find just laying on the ground. I found black obsidian, old pottery pieces. You know, I got so many of these like fragments and stuff. And no, I love Mexico for the fact that you know it's still an old world. I mean, you can still find things like America's pretty much been paved over and you know kind of like you know you got a lot of restricted areas that you can't go to and you know like we build on we build on everything and it's like down here you can still just walk out out in the mountains and find like artifacts however many years maybe close to a couple thousand years or at least
Robert,
1,500 years old. Huh?
Robert, well, shall we
Yeah.
give Brien a chance maybe to answer you?
Oh, yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
Brien,
Yeah.
what did you think of? Because obviously, Robert lives where there's lots of uncovered pyramids as well. What did you think about what he was just saying?
Well, Mexico is inundated with ancient sites. It's just that's why I like to go once a year because there's so much to see, and the government has done a really good job actually at doing excavations and maintaining ancient sites. But it's kind of like Peru. There's so many ancient places that they can't possibly take care of all of them. For example, Palenque. They've only uncovered 15% of it so far because it's a huge site that goes deep into the jungle. So that's why I like to go once a year and bring a group of people and we explore the Olmec, Toltec, Aztec, and Maya locations.
Awesome.
So much that we don't know, isn't there, and covered up and unseen. Can I just say, because you put a video out as well last night, or very recently, about Nazca lines, didn't you?
Yeah.
Do you want to just say a little bit about it to the chat room?
Well, the latest one I did was I was invited by the History Channel to fly over Nazca with Eric von Daniken. So we did that in March, I think it was, and it was quite incredible because I first heard about Nazca from watching Eric von Daniken on TV when I was a kid. So getting to fly over it with him was an amazing experience. He's still very bright and sharp at 83. And he's not as much of a alien related guy as some people think. He's a very smart man, and he's been misquoted a lot. So actually having the opportunity to spend a couple of days with him was a great experience in the Nazca area.
Yeah, I found it very interesting when you were on last time explaining that the Nazca lines weren't all done at the same time. Some did them in like figures and some did them more in like whatever it was, numbers or whatever. There's two different types up there.
Yeah, two different cultures over 1,000 years.
Amazing, isn't it? There's this bit, isn't there? Like with these elongated skulls, the same, isn't there? There's this sort of like different era again.
Yeah, well, again, the problem is that academia tends to be kind of short-sighted when it comes to how old the places are and how long it took to make them. So the more that you explore the locations, you start to see inconsistencies that don't fit in with the standard chronology that they talk about. So as I said, at Palenque, there are some massive basalt slabs that don't fit in with the standard way the Maya built stuff, which was more or less with small stones and a form of volcanic ash concrete. So that shows you two different ages of construction. And there's also another location called Uxmal, and we were very fortunate to have our guide is a native Mexican, and he's descended from the Aztec, and he knows the Nahuatl language of the Aztec perfectly, and he also understands some Mayan. So when we went to this one site called Uxmal, where I saw megalithic work mixed in with Mayan work, I said, what does Uxmal originally mean? And he said, built 3 times. So that shows you 3 different ages of construction.
Wow.
Can I ask you a question, Brian?
Sure.
Going back to Nazca. You've written a book, haven't you, about Nazca?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the purpose of Nazca? What's your take on that? I've not read your book, by the way, just so you know. But what's your take on it?
Well, it depends on what time frame you're looking at. These lines and figures were done over the course of 1,000 years, so it wasn't like one like you don't maintain one purpose for 1,000 years usually. So I looked at all of the theories involved, and people saying, well, it was done for this reason or it was done for that reason. It was done for different reasons depending upon what culture was doing it and the time frame. So some of the lines represent solstice and equinox markers. Other ones are mapping underground water. Some of the figures were for ceremonial, like the big ones were for ceremonial purposes, because each one has an opening. For example, the hummingbird, the beak is actually open, so that would be the entranceway into a ceremonial pathway. And other ones just seem to have been done for almost playful reasons in the area of. Sorry?
Have you heard the one about the blueprints for the pyramids?
Yeah, no, I don't really get that, because the Nazca lines they're not complicated in terms of how they were made. All they simply did was scrape away the volcanic layer which is on top, which tends to be red or gray or black, and underneath that is a white silt. It's like a clay. So by scraping the surface down by maybe 20 centimeters, you wind up with this contrast. The reason why they still exist is because Nazca gets, I think, 0 rainfall per year. Once in a while, there'll be a flash flood, but there's also not a lot of wind that blows in Nazca. So they've been preserved because the environment is quite stable. And luckily now the Peruvian government heavily restricts anybody trying to access them, and they cover like 100 or 200 square miles, so they're vast in scale. So yeah, it's a very complex story. The most curious one, of course, is the astronaut, and the astronaut, which is what the archaeologists call it, is on the side of a mountain with one arm waving up in the air as if waving to somebody in the sky. So that's curious. And one of the largest ones is called the Candelabro, which is about 12 miles from where I am. And it's a giant trident that's 500 feet tall. And it's actually the mirror image of the Southern Cross star system. So the Southern Cross rises perfectly behind it. And that was probably a navigational marker.
Is it easy to get to see these Nazca lines, or is it quite difficult again if you can't go on foot? You know, are there only so many people can go and see these? Do you have to get permission?
Well, you get in a plane and you fly over Nazca. That's
that's quite easy to do.
Oh yeah, you can fly from Nazca, you can fly from Ica, which is another city, or you can fly from here in Paracas. And if you fly from Paracas, it's about a 2.5 hour trip there and back, and you see the whole system. It's much bigger than what most people think it is.
So how many miles then?
About 150 miles worth.
Right. And what's your take on what they are then?
Well, again, it's a complex puzzle because some of them were for solstice and equinox markers. Some are for tracking underground water because there is no surface water. There are underground streams that go from the Andes into the Pacific, and so that's why the ancient Paracas culture was able to find the underground sources and use them for agriculture more than 2,000 years ago.
Why do you think they made them so that the only way you could really see them or understand them was from the air?
That's the curious thing is, again, that's where the ancient astronaut theory comes in, which is possible. I'm not quite sure, but also the system is so vast that it would have taken a huge number of people to do them in quite a harsh climate. So obviously the Nazca and Paracas had a lot of resources on hand to be able to divert so many people to work on them. And they had to have had abundant food to allow for these specialists to create these giant figures. So it's an ongoing mystery that is slowly it's like anything. We are slowly unraveling.
Do you think we were more advanced back then in the fact that we were flying around?
No, I'm not in this area, no.
What if they were carved out by some enormous giant, you know?
No, it's again, the system of making them is actually quite simple. The question is, why did they do so much? Because that's why you can only see them from the air, because the system is so huge, and it covers, like I said, more than 150 miles worth of them.
Do you think that they were made when the ground might have been a bit softer, and then we've had a cataclysmic happening, those archenes, whatever's happened, the mud floods, but for some reason the weather changed and they got saved, like that reason, because of the weather?
Well, to some degree, the area started to turn into desert about 1,000 years ago. So it's been getting drier ever since. And that area is described as being almost like African savanna lands more than 1,000 years ago. But now there's no rainfall, and most of the area is barren. You can't even grow a cactus there unless you access the underground water. And then you can grow anything, because there are, probably 100,000 acres of, sorry?
Do you think another reason they won't let you near them is maybe they resonate or something as well? They've got properties.
No, I don't think so. It's just it's very easy to damage them. And a bunch of Greenpeace idiots were there 4 years ago and put out a bunch of big cardboard letters saying, "Save the planet" or something like that, right next to the hummingbird figure. And luckily they were caught by the Peruvian police, and I hope they're in jail for a very long time, because these people came from another country and invaded a sacred space, and that's not acceptable.
No, we don't need any more of it ruined.
No.
We need to what we can see and what we're uncovering. can you again explain when you're coming to the UK? Someone was mentioning that you're coming the end of August. Is it the end of August, or are you coming September?
No, it's September. I think it's the 15th and 16th of September. I'll be in West Yorkshire, and the information is on my website, hiddenincatours.com. And then after that, my wife and I are going down to Glastonbury to visit with Maria and see Stonehenge and Avebury and whatever else. Of course, Glastonbury tour and stuff, and the whole Arthurian thing. And I think we'll be there for about 5 days, and then we fly back to Peru from there.
Cool. So about the 18th, 19th of September, you'll start your visit there.
Yeah, we'll be in West Yorkshire 15th and 16th, I believe it is. Andrew Collins will be there, and then we head by train down to the south of England and visit the Glastonbury area.
Yay for people in the UK if they want to maybe meet you.
Yeah.
It's quite awesome. I'm just still gobsmacked that nobody around here knows what those things are, Silbury Hill and that. I know that that's not so much your field. It's here, isn't it? You live in Peru and you go to lots of other places. But for me, it's like right in the middle of where we're sort of waking up, and then there's this place that nobody around here knows about. They just think it's a lump of earth.
Well, that's actually kind of typical about the local population anywhere. It's the same thing about the ancient sites in Peru. A lot of Peruvians are not very interested because the stuff's basically always been here. But for someone foreign, especially who comes from Canada, where there is no such a thing as a megalithic site or anything like that, it captivated me enough that I decided to live here to study this stuff. So it's been a great experience.
Yeah, did you ever think that it was going to turn out like this for you, if you know what I mean?
I don't know. It's just if you go where your heart tells you to go, then usually you're in the right place, and that's exactly my situation.
Yeah, have you got any more seminars? Because I used a little bit of it for tonight's intro. You were talking about the results of those skulls, like unknown, unknown, unknown. I mean, when you hear it like that, it's quite strange, isn't it? And nobody really knows about it.
Well, the most recent, I went back and looked at the data a couple of weeks ago, and yeah, there are five of the skulls. The DNA results came back unknown haplogroup, which is very strange because supposedly all of humanity has been mapped at this point, including Neanderthal and Denisovan. So for the Paracas to have unknown haplogroups is very, very curious. And that's obviously one of the next steps in the whole process of what I'm looking at.
Is to map that bit out, you mean?
Yeah.
Amazing. Astral,
Okay.
carry on, sorry.
Well, I'm just going to say it's incredible, it's not been televised and, shown like in the newspapers or, been taken aboard by, National Geographic for that matter. Or have they? Done a piece on it a bit.
No, but the problem is things like National Geographic is a heavily controlled business. Like the Smithsonian is a heavily controlled institution. So the old paradigm of that kind of thing of, well, let's tell the press or whatever has become pointless. The whole thing is the free use of internet technology like YouTube. So that's why, to get my information out, I make YouTube videos for people to watch, rather than go through some kind of service or business of the typical way. As time goes on, people are watching television less and less because they know that too much of it is at this point is basically crap, including all of the major news outlets. And so the best way to do it is simply directly through the internet from you to the world, rather than say, well, I better contact an academic and give them the information, because you wind up getting stuck in bottlenecks that way. A lot of academics don't want to know anything that doesn't fit their paradigm. So that whole concept of spreading knowledge is a dying thing, which is good, because that way also this information cannot be controlled. Once it's on the internet, I guess somebody could track it down and try to delete it. But I tend to not get involved in politics publicly or anything like that, or any controversial subject which is sensitive. So that way I'm able to leak what I know without getting on the radar of anybody who could or would want to try to control what I do or say.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. And with that, I'm afraid I have to depart.
Hey, it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, and I'm really hoping to meet you in September.
Okay,
but I'm
super.
sure we'll talk before then anyway. But thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow. Amazing, Astral. Astral, you're muted.
Yeah, it was. But I missed, unfortunately, so much of it. My flipping internet.
Yeah, I think lots of people had problems with the internet tonight. It's quite amazing, isn't it? Having this nice talk about elongated skulls. I actually didn't, but Patricia did before the hangout. Yeah, Maria kept going in and out a bit, didn't she? You? Oh, well, anyway.
I was very quiet. Sorry.
I know you were.
So far, it's really far out of my area of expertise.
I know, when they finish talking, I actually don't really know what to say, because, I mean, I'm not an archaeologist. But it was great.
Hearing about it, you know, and some of the sites I do know about.
Never like
it's
any
just
other.
Interesting, isn't it? Other people's takes on things, you know, the Nazca lines.
We have a site here in America called Chaco. It's just a pile of rubble, man. They say it's a couple thousand years old, but I went there and it was just rocks. There was hardly any structures or anything. Yeah, it was like a fire pit or two. It was like.
Flat Earth Dude?
Yeah, you're breaking up again.
Oh, it's just so annoying today. Flat Earth Dude, we didn't quite hear the end of what you said. Whoa. It's not me today.
Break. That's a shot. Yeah.
Yeah, you're cutting in and out. We can't really hear you.
Right.
Damn thing.
Are
you back now?
Damn.
You're back now.
Am I back? Chaco Canyon. It's a site here in America. It's about, they say it's a couple thousand years old, but that's the oldest place I've ever been, and it was just a big pile of rubble. There was hardly anything there. It was weird. So that's as close as I've been to.
Have you tried looking at it from a overhead view, you know, like from Google Maps type of thing? Or Google Earth, whatever it's called.
Yeah, not lately, but
you know, because it might tell a different story then, if you know what I mean. Because looking at it from a walking around is, yeah, well, you get a good view that way, obviously, but from an overhead view, you get something else.
No doubt, that's cool. Yeah, I don't know about Stonehenge. I've seen some videos where it shows them like kind of rebuilding it back in the 1950s. Did you guys see that video?
Yeah, I don't think it's like miles out, but they just haven't put it back quite right. They wouldn't want to, would they? Like, what it was.
But Stonehenge as well, that is also part of a giant complex, Avebury and Stonehenge. And if you take aerial, you know, it's like a big, like a kind of a big valley kind of thing, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have probably both been there.
I've never been there.
I've been to Silbury Hill and Avebury. I've been to the tour at Glastonbury. Yeah, been to a few
I think I've driven past Stonehenge.
Old Arrows.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's way out of my area of study. Way out. It's interesting. I like Wise Up. I like his style and what he brings, but to the ancient sites.
Yeah, he's another
And,
concept of it, isn't he?
Yeah.
Anyway, it may not be the
What-
longest hangout today, but I've really enjoyed today. It's really always nice having somebody, you know, who's so into this thing comes onto our channel. But as he explains, he doesn't go politically because he feels that he can get through it easier this way by going straight to the people. But I've really enjoyed it. People have been a bit on and off tonight, including Astral.
Yeah, so can't do anything about
yeah.
that.
Anyway, so when you guys started, I got a call from Aaron.
Oh, lovely, Aaron.
And he
messaged me earlier on getting there.
He go live with the
Deary me. What's going on today? So sorry, chat room. Don't know what's going on.
You're breaking up.
Iron coin.
But breaking up.
Go stand outside.
Anyway,
Stand outside on one leg with your thumb in your left ear. One of them tips and tricks.
on that note, though, do you think that, you know, we've had a nice hangout today, but we'll finish now? We've been going for about an hour and 3/4. It's been a really amazing hangout, and to have such two people in their field, I suppose, our future. Hopefully they'll become flat earthers. But anyway, thank you to everybody. Thank you to Brien Foerster, to Maria Wheatley, to our Patricia, to Astral, to Flat Earth Dude. Was that everybody? Anyway, it's a big good night from us, and we'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow we're talking with John Smith out on location and doing his activism. Anyway, big hugs from us. See you tomorrow.
Good night. Be good.